Well, hello, good afternoon. Do you know what time it is? It's time for Fertility with Fink and Friends. Now is the time that the jingle is supposed to start. Dun, 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 dun. Fertility with Fink and Friends. I am Dr. Randy Fink. I am Fink. You are friends. I am the medical director of Miami Center of Excellence, CNY Fertility at the Miami Center of Excellence in Miami, Florida, and the clinical director of IVF services here at CNY Fertility in Colorado Springs. And it is great to see everybody here with us this afternoon. It's 4 o'clock in the mountains, which means 6 o'clock on the East Coast, 3 o'clock on the West Coast. And wow, what a week it's been. And it's only Tuesday. My goodness. So let's see who we have joining us here. Everybody is loading up here. So it looks like Eyes SYB and Queen Dolly are our first to join on the CNY side over here. And I see my friend and I always have trouble with your name, and I'm so sorry. M. Salustio 2021. She is number one. Hi, Nikki. Nice to see you. And Pretty Binky and Rusic Blue in Las Vegas. My dear friend Amber. Hello, Mrs. Vence from Kentucky. Hi, Sam. How nice to see everybody. Gosh, it's 62 fun-filled degrees here in Colorado Springs. We got a little cold front here, and it sort of feels like summertime is over, but I'm told it's going to warm up again a little bit. And thoughts going out still to our friends in Hawaii who are dealing with recovering from their disaster. And of course, to all our friends in New England and up in the Canadian Maritimes who have a big storm coming their way. And I think, I moved here to Colorado from South Florida, if you weren't aware. And it's so strange to not have to even look at the tropics and be aware of all the hurricanes, having had our butts handed to us a few years ago with 4 feet of water in my downstairs living in the Florida Keys when that particular storm made its way through. Hi to all our friends on Facebook and YouTube as well. Hi, Zenny. Nice to see you. And Amaisa from Miami also there. Looks like Ethan. We've got Rachel and Tamara. So we've got a couple of different Instagram feeds here. We have YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook right here in the middle. So I thought maybe we'd start today with a couple of little stories. The first one that kind of resonated with me was something I had heard a long time ago, and I never really gave it too much of a second thought, even though it was a little bit of an inspiration, and now in particular. So I will tell you that today, I'm here in the office by myself. I did 15 transfers and several retrievals, a couple of hysteroscopies, and it was a busy day. Lots of folks wanting to be pregnant here, and unfortunately, as we know, all of these transfers will not work. Babe Ruth struck out. Now I can't remember the number. I think 1,170 times, or maybe it's 1,400. I was all prepared for this story. Back in those days of baseball, apparently things were very different. There was not this emphasis on home runs and hitting these major big hits that sent a runner all the way around the bases. It was about keeping the ball in play. So striking out was not something that was really all that common. It happened, but certainly Babe Ruth is not remembered for his striking out. He's remembered for his record number of home runs. So the fact that Babe Ruth struck out that many times means that maybe it's okay if people like you and me don't get it right every single time. And here's another little tale that might be of interest. It was about an inventor from a long time ago, we'll say, and he was working on a project that he really wanted to see succeed. It had to do with some electricity things, and what he was trying to do was, in fact, trying to make a light bulb. This guy's name was Thomas Alva Edison. And Thomas Edison um, went through about 10,000 experiments with different filaments and different things because his goal was to make a long acting light bulb. 10,000 times he experimented and got something that didn't work or that wouldn't last. He looked at each of those, what you might call failures, as an opportunity to learn something. And he did, because finally he came upon this little type of bamboo filament, of all things, that ended up being the precursor for the modern day light bulb. And that little bamboo filament ended up creating a light bulb that would last about 1,200 hours. Really incredible. And aside from the fact that he created the light bulb, he made the phonograph, he made the movie camera. He had thousands of other patents. And each one of those things that he did probably had, according to him, on order of about 10,000 different times that it didn't work before he finally got to the one that did. We don't focus on those failures for him. We focus on the success every time we turn on a light bulb, every time we use electricity, obviously, every time we hear music, every time we see something moving, a moving picture. We're focusing on his success, not on the failure. And that's a valuable lesson to carry with us into the fertility world. It bugs me when someone tells me, well, we did a transfer and it was a failure, or we did IVF and it failed. Well, did it really fail? And I would suggest that the answer to that is no. You may not have gotten pregnant that time. But as I've said in the weeks past, each time we do this, we learn something new about your body, about the way you will respond to medications, about the way sperm comes together with egg, about the little biochemistry of an embryo. We learn something every single time, and every single time it's valuable because we can apply that to the next time when we're much more likely to get something that works. So hang in there. We are all here with you. The other thing that I am fond of pointing out here is that this is such a beautiful and very strong community together that stands together in each other's successes and each other's failures. So don't think of it as a failure. Think of it as an opportunity to learn something, and that you, my friends, are not alone. So that said, happy again to see everybody here on the CNY side. Styles by Hoggy. I like that. There's Miss Gracie. What range do you like to have your first beta HCG while on an HCG booster? I did my first FET on Thursday, September the 7th. Okay, so let's talk about those HCG boosters. We've talked about this before, and if you haven't heard about it, or if you're not familiar with my feelings on this matter, I want to share it with you. HCG is, of course, the pregnancy hormone, and in some cases, we will use an HCG booster after doing an embryo transfer. Why do we do this? That HCG becomes progesterone in the body. And that progesterone is very important. It's the necessary hormone for the pregnancy to continue to grow. Now, eventually, the placenta takes over making the progesterone by about 9 weeks or so. So usually we have you continue using your progesterone until you're about 10 weeks of pregnancy. But the purpose of the HCG booster is to just increase the amount of progesterone in your body. Okay, so what does that mean? When do you need that? Well, if you're doing a medicated cycle FET, the booster probably isn't all that necessary. In fact, the data shows us it really doesn't change outcomes very much. If you're doing a natural cycle FET, frozen embryo transfer, then yes, the HCG booster does make a difference. It improves the outcome. So I strongly encourage it in people who are doing a natural cycle. But it's the HCG, it's the pregnancy hormone, right? So when we do that first pregnancy test, you have to know it's going to be positive. And it's going to be positive because we put HCG into your body, right? So that's what the HCG booster is. you're getting HCG, so naturally you're going to have some in your body, and it's usually in the range of about typically under 70 or so, usually more like 50 or below. And the first one, you know what? Don't put too much stock in. Don't try to read too much into it, but understand the first one is going to be positive, your first pregnancy test. It's the second one that you're going to do 48 hours later that's going to tell us that you're really pregnant. So don't try to interpret too much by the number. Just know that you're going to do one. It doesn't matter what the number is. 48 hours later, you're going to repeat that pregnancy test, and that's when we're going to have our answer. So, Miss Y. Gracie, I hope that is useful for you. Chell Boogie, ooh, I like that name. Let's see, Pretty Binky, nice to see you there. What else we have here over on the Facebook side? Let's go back up to the top here. And again, hi to Rachel. Tamara asks, or forgive me if it's Tamara. Tamara. Is it today or tomorrow? It's Tamara. How does a micro HCG wash work just prior to transfer? Will the wash come out or wash out the embryo if done too close to the transfer? Well, that's a good question, and it is controversial. So first of all, we're talking about HCG washes here. An HCG wash is something we offer. It's part of really any of our immune protocols from level 2 and up, which is for most everybody who's done IVF. HCG is the pregnancy hormone. And when we place some of it inside the uterine cavity, then what happens is that we are turning up some of the little receptors that are listening for pregnancy and create proteins and things that make that lining, the endometrial lining, more receptive to your pregnancy. So an HCG wash is something that's very useful. If you have the ability to do it, I strongly encourage that you do. There is something that's called the micro HCG wash. So typically in the CNY system, the HCG wash is done a day or two prior to embryo transfer. And in that regard, there is a certain amount of volume of that hormone that goes in that's designed to wash through the uterine lining. But there's not so much volume that it's there when it comes time to do your embryo transfer. There is a small study that looked at what's called a micro HCG wash. The micro HCG wash is where you use a much lower volume of that HCG, and it's placed around the time of transfer. And as Tamara points out, 45 to 90 minutes. There's some studies that say 10 to 15 minutes before transfer. We typically don't recommend this because it's very hard to get the timing exactly right, which means that you have to have this wash. You have to be in the transfer room occupying a space, have this wash done, have the embryo there in a timely enough fashion that it sort of adheres to the study guideline. And it's very hard mechanistically to get that done because the embryology, preparing the embryo takes a little bit of time from the time that we call it. And just getting that to work right is logistically not a very easy thing to do. So we typically do not recommend this. And the second reason is because you do have volume that's there inside the uterine cavity at the time that you place the embryo in. And that's potentially risky. Why? Well, for the same reason that if we do an ultrasound around the time of your embryo transfer and we see that your endometrial lining, your uterine cavity, is loaded up with fluid, where did that fluid come from? It's usually inflammatory type fluid that is sort of being secreted from the uterine lining. That may be a sign of illness, but you have too much volume in there. Yes, it can wash an embryo out. And so that's one of the reasons that we're really cautious about that micro HCG wash and don't routinely recommend it. Sometimes people will ask for it, so we'll do the best we can. And our clinic here in Colorado Springs, the wash is done downstairs in the clinic, and then you come up to the transfer room where you have your transfer. I have not personally seen that it dramatically increases the results of positive pregnancy tests. So again, I would advise be cautious about what you read. Be cautious about what you read on the internet. A lot of folks get all their information from the internet. And again, I always describe the internet as the world's biggest bathroom wall. So you can sort of say whatever you want on the internet, governed, here's a perfect example of it. You can say whatever you want on the internet. It doesn't have to be true, but if it's on the internet, then people will hear it as fact. So, take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt. So, but a very good question there, my friend. Let's see. Rachel says, I have a question about PCOS and subclinical Hashimoto's. What is your advice for a protocol? Well, there is PCOS can mean a lot of different things, but in terms of IVF, what PCOS means to us is that you are likely to respond pretty well to medication. So usually when we come up with dosing for what are we going to give you to stimulate your ovaries, we are doing that generally based on age. Age usually tells us how your ovaries are going to, pretty reliably are going to respond. Secondarily, it's going to be based upon the AMH level, the anti-Mullerian hormone. The AMH, if it's above about a 5, is consistent with ovaries that are probably going to respond like polycystic ovaries. They are going to respond very well. So you're at some risk for ovarian hyperstimulation. So usually what we do is we take the age-based dose and we drop it down a little bit so that your ovaries don't become the size of bowling balls and you don't end up in the hospital being hyperstimulated. So that's the first thing as it pertains to the PCOS. Hashimoto's, if you're not familiar, Hashimoto's, I just like to say the word. Hashimoto's means autoimmune thyroiditis. So it's an autoimmune, your immune system is attacking your own thyroid gland. And I point here to my neck because the thyroid, as you may know, lives kind of right here. So the way we feel a thyroid gland is usually kind of stand behind you, put 2 fingers here, and ask you to swallow. So when you swallow, your cartilage moves up and down. And if you're used to feeling it, you can tell what the thyroid gland feels like. Well, your immune system can attack your own thyroid gland, and that causes what's called Hashimoto's disease or autoimmune thyroiditis. What that tells me is that, so first of all, as far as the thyroid goes, there is a specific range that we're looking for your thyroid hormone to be as it pertains to fertility. And this is whether you are trying to get pregnant yourself at home or whether you're doing some kind of treatment. We want to see the TSH, which stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. We want to see that level between a 0.5 and a 2.5. 0.5 and 2.5 is the range. And the way that thyroid thing works is that the higher the number, the slower your thyroid gland is. The lower the number, the higher the volume knob is turned on your thyroid, or the faster the thyroid is. So between 0.5 and 2.5. So let's say that we test your TSH, as we do in all of our preconception tests, and we do it in the beginning of every cycle, whether it be a frozen embryo transfer or a retrieval cycle. We want to know where that TSH is landing. And let's say it comes back at 3. Well, 3 is high or low? 3 is a high number. It's above 2.5, but the higher the number, the lower the thyroid. So therefore, we're going to give you a little thyroid in order to stimulate the gland to make it function a little bit more optimally for pregnancy. And that's the way the thyroid part works. But when you have an autoimmune situation, your immune system is attacking the thyroid gland, it tells us that you have some inflammation. Inflammation is, of course, the enemy of the body. So that tells us that we probably want to step up your immune protocol, at least to our immune protocol level 3, to see what we can do to try to take down that inflammation. Now, Hashimoto's does mean something different in the anti-aging community. So if you come to me for, let's say, thyroid or for hormone optimization, I am going to be looking at a kind of a different number in there, but oftentimes people who have this Hashimoto's thyroiditis have symptoms from it. Many medical endocrinologists say, well, if there's no symptom from the Hashimoto's, then it doesn't mean anything and you just ignore it, you leave it alone. I'm of the belief that when someone has Hashimoto's, maybe it's just because the way those folks select themselves out, they come see me because they're not feeling well. We typically do treat it. And we look at a different number when we're doing that, but hopefully that answers your question there, my friend Rachel. What else we got going on here? Well, let's take a look back here at the B Voyager. Hello to you. And Styles by Hoggy is from Atlanta. Hello, Atlanta. Good to see you this afternoon. Okay, just D1 and only. Nice to see you as well. Boy, everybody is saying hi to me. Appreciate that. Hi from Virginia. And let's see if we get some questions over here. All right. Eyes SYB. What is your medication protocol for transfer? Is it progesterone and oil or suppositories? Any other alternative to help get the eggs to stick? So, this goes back to medicated versus natural cycle for an FET. And what does that mean? The medicated cycle, they've been doing it since IVF was invented, and that's estrogen for 6 to 12 days to get that lining to thicken up. It's progesterone in oil, and it is usually also using some progesterone suppositories. In the medicated cycle, we are providing all the hormones that your body is using. We are suppressing your body's function of hormones and giving you everything that you need. And we're testing every level to make sure everything is exactly where we want it to be. So that's the medicated cycle. In a natural cycle, your body's going to make its own progesterone. It's going to make its own estrogen. So we still give you a little extra progesterone because your body can use a little extra. So you use just the vaginal suppository. You don't have to use the injection, which is a nice way to, a nice reason that people often choose to use the natural cycle. There's some evidence that shows us that the natural cycle may have a little higher rate of pregnancy, maybe a little lower rate of miscarriage, and certainly a lower risk of certain types of pregnancy complications that happen later on during the pregnancy. So given that, my preference is always really for a natural cycle if you can. Sometimes it doesn't work, well for you. There may be reasons that we decide against it, but certainly that's something for you to ask about. So we talk about natural versus medicated, the estrogen, the progesterone. That's the meat. That's the cake. I'm thinking meat and potatoes. That's the cake and potatoes, or that's the meat and the icing. You know what I mean, right? That's the meat and the icing. The cake is the estrogen and progesterone. The icing we put on that is the immune protocols. And we have several different protocols we can use depending on your situation. And can you eat cake without icing? Sure you can. Of course you can. But in my opinion, it tastes better with icing. So that's why we do offer these immune protocols, because inflammation is something, it is the body's enemy. It is what one of the things, certainly for sure, that keeps us from getting pregnant. So that's what we have over there. And let's see what else we got. Are there other options to diagnose and treat endometriosis? Had a hard time getting diagnosed for various reasons. So this comes from AP Thomas, number 30. Hello, AP Thomas, number 30. Yes, to diagnose endometriosis classically was always by laparoscopy. So it's by surgery. Laparoscopy is under general anesthesia, where we place a little camera through your belly button, look around inside the pelvis, and see if we can see endometriosis. If you ask your general gynecologist, the answer is going to be, well, sure, you have to have a laparoscopy. That's the way it's done. Yes, there is another way to get diagnosed that doesn't require surgery and general anesthesia, and that's a test that's called Receptiva. RECEPTIVA, receptivadx.com is the website. It's a non-invasive test where we can suck a little piece of tissue out from the lining of the uterus and look for the presence of a protein that's called BCL6. BCL6 is a marker that is indicative of endometriosis. It's pretty specific. This test has a sensitivity of 93 to 96%, so it's a pretty good test. It may cost you less than your laparoscopy as well, even though insurance doesn't cover the test. But with co-insurances and deductibles and all kinds of other things there, that it can definitely add up. Some would argue that, maybe instead of, the time that we really start worrying about endometriosis is in people who have done repeated embryo transfers and are not getting pregnant. Again, endometriosis is where that lining of the uterus that normally sloughs off when you get pregnant, instead of going out the door, moving south, works its way north. It moves its way up and implants within the pelvis. And then it starts changing the way the brain talks to the uterus. Some would argue, well, why do a lapar? Why test for it at all? We can just treat you empirically. Empirically means that we can treat you as though you had it without knowing for sure that you have it. And, it may be that laparoscopy is not perfect because maybe you have a little endometriosis that the surgeon doesn't see. Maybe it's that the 93 to 96% sensitivity on the receptiva is not high. Maybe you're in that 3 or 4%. The test is going to be negative for. So maybe you just treat it anyway with 60 days of medication. Well, the advantage to surgery is that you can actually have the endometriosis removed. We excise it as opposed to using the medication for 60 days. And what that shows us is that when we treat that, remember that's BCL6, when that's positive, and we treat that BCL6 with medication for 60 days to suppress it, there's a 66% probability of a successful transfer the very next cycle after completing that medical treatment. So maybe it's worth just going ahead and treating it. Sometimes insurance will cover it without the diagnosis. And if that's the case, if your insurance is going to cover that med, it's going to cost you $20 a month to do it. It makes an awful lot more sense to be able to treat it. I just saw on on LinkedIn, Nicola Katsikas. I cannot believe my eyes. I have to tell you a story, and Nicola may not be on anymore. That may have just been a little transient thing. 4:22, 6 minutes ago. Nicola is one of my oldest friends since I was like that big, and I haven't seen or heard from her in, probably 15 or I don't even know what to say. So, I hope you'll send me a message there because I'd love to catch back up with you. Okay, Ariel is here on the Facebook side. Oh, I got, you know what? I skipped my Instagram. We'll come back to you over here. Boy, thanks, Nicole. You just made me totally lose my train of thought. Ariel is here. My HCG went from 2479 to 11,557. Whoo, the second ultrasound is tomorrow. And yes, you should hear a heartbeat. Forever grateful to CNY. Took 1 attempt elsewhere and 3 with CNY, but the affordability with CNY was able to give me many more rounds. That's one of the things that we like best is that you can probably do 4 or 5 cycles here for what it might cost you to do one there in your hometown. So even when you add a little bit of travel and some restaurants and a hotel stay, it still is certainly much more affordable. But thanks, Ariel. That is fantastic. We are so happy to hear it. Ethan is telling me my wife is about to be 43. Her FSH number is 7 and her AMH is 2.165. Is that good? Yes, those are really good numbers. So almost 2.2 for an AMH at 43 years old is probably better than average for age. So that's great. She has 2 children. The last one was 19 years ago. I want to know if her levels are good to get pregnant using IVF. Yes, those numbers are really good for age. The concern we have is not just necessarily the ovarian reserve, which is what the AMH measures, but also the egg quality. And egg quality means, well, what's the status of the DNA that's in those eggs? It gets harder for us to get pregnant as we mature anyway. And why is that? Because that DNA becomes less stable. The same absolutely holds true for IVF. We get each individual egg and we fertilize each individual egg, but we still face the same kind of challenges from the biology. So yes, those numbers are great for somebody who's 43. I would do everything that I could to try to improve her egg quality, because that's going to be the bigger issue for you. And Ethan says, from Louisiana going to Colorado for our IVF. We are looking forward to seeing you here in Colorado. All right, what else we got here? Stephanie Anna. Hi, Stephanie. My AMH is 18 and it was flagged as high. Yes, it is. Is there anything I can naturally do to help improve this? Well, my friend, what that means is that your ovaries are going to respond really well to medications. An AMH of 18 is consistent with polycystic ovaries. It may not be the polycystic ovarian syndrome, because that has some different things associated with it to make the diagnosis, but your ovaries are going to respond like polycystic ovaries. The one thing I would do for you is, if you're going to be trying on your own, is a supplement that's called inositol. Inositol is the same as metformin, which is a medication that we use. Inositol can help to sensitize your ovaries, to help keep you ovulating more regularly. And that would probably be the first thing that I would think of there, Stephanie, and wish you all the best. Tara's asking, hi, Tara, and 5 to 6 oocytes, is that a bad number for someone who's 40 years old? No, actually, that's not bad at all, given that at 40, sometimes people will have 1 or 2. Now, sometimes people have 15. It can vary, but to retrieve 6 eggs at 40, I think is pretty good. Not a bad number at all. There is a calculator that you can use that's part of a website that's called MD Calc, MDCALC. And you can extrapolate from that if you Google MD Calc egg calculator. That will tell you, based upon it really has to do with if you're freezing eggs, if you're banking eggs, you're doing egg cryopreservation, you're going to freeze your eggs, which is always a good idea. You've heard me talk about this before, I hope. I feel very strongly that freezing eggs is something that is a great gift to give to yourself, because it's buying a fertility insurance policy for sure. But if you lost my train of thought there again, because I just saw Nicola answer me back. I'm here. Thanks for nothing, Nicola. If you have, I have no idea what I was just talking about. The MD Calc. Thank you. Thanks. So MD Calc egg calculator. You can put in your age and you'll see what the number is. Given, X number of eggs, it will tell you what the likelihood of achieving a 1 or 2 pregnancies as a result of that number of eggs. So you can plug that number in, and that, kind of gives you an idea of what we would really hopefully be looking for in terms of number of eggs. Now, for IVF, things are a little bit different. What that is calculating based on the evidence is for egg freezing, and embryos always freeze better than eggs. So the number is probably a little bit better than that. So take a look at it, because that is something that might be pretty interesting. All right, I'm going to take a look here. Misa K5. I have known endometriosis and have done immune protocol 3 or 4 without IVIG and had 4 unsuccessful transfers. Any suggestions for our next? Yes. So I think the level 3 and certainly the level 4 immune protocols are good things. But if you have known endometriosis, I certainly hope that you have done or have considered and talked about doing suppressive therapy. So what is that suppressive therapy? We talked about it a minute ago when we were talking about the test, the Receptiva test. The suppressive therapy classically was Lupron. Lupron is a shot. You can get it daily. You can get it once monthly. You can get it once that will last you for 3 months, depending on the type and the dose. Lupron shuts everything off. It's like turning off the, don't ask me to make that noise again, but yeah, it's like turning off the faucet for all the hormones. It does put you into a temporary menopause. Now, we can give you a little bit of hormone back that will prevent you from having side effects from that are too bad, but Lupron is shutting down all the hormones. There are 2 other medications that we commonly use. One is called Orilissa. The other is called Myfembree. Orilissa has become very popular. Myfembree is a newer medication. It has the lowest of the side effect profiles, and that's the one that I prefer. But 60 days of these medications can do the job. There is another medication that we can also use. Sometimes Lupron is just too expensive. Sometimes Orilissa and Myfembree are just too expensive and insurance won't cover them. Letrozole will do the same thing. Letrozole is something that we sometimes use in our stimulations or for ovulation induction. Letrozole shuts down decreases your estrogen levels. So that's a less expensive, albeit less ideal way to do it, but it is a way to do it nevertheless. So hopefully that's helpful there. Currently on day 6 of priming for my 4th transfer, 3rd FET, and doing a modified natural. Curious when it is safe or recommended to get my flu vaccine and COVID booster. Well, you can actually get the flu vaccine really at any time. So you can get it when you're pregnant. You can get it before pregnancy. Strongly encouraged the flu vaccine because contracting influenza when pregnant will have or is really known to have bad outcomes both on pregnancy and on mom. People can get very, very sick. And in the peak of flu pandemic season, when I was practicing general obstetrics, there would be about 1 to 2 deaths a year from young, otherwise healthy, pregnant women who contracted influenza and got so sick that it ended up costing their lives. So will a flu shot keep you from getting the flu? Nope, you can still get it. But will it keep you from becoming critically ill? That's really the goal. It's to prevent hospitalization. And as someone who has been on the other end of that, a couple of years, I've actually gotten dreadfully ill, not just like, oh, I'm so sick, I don't feel good, but like hospitalized, very severe, very, very severely ill from influenza, with influenza meningitis, which is where it gets in around the look at me going like this. Yeah, no, where it affects, the brain. Maybe that's my problem. And the infectious disease doc. And I said, well, oh, geez, I guess that's what I get for getting a flu shot. And he said, no, because without that flu shot, you might have been leaving this hospital in a box. And that is very scary stuff. COVID, I haven't seen, well, so the recommendation is that you can proceed with it. I haven't seen anything about the new booster. And of course, that's very controversial as well, people's feelings about COVID vaccine. So I'm going to hold off on saying anything about the COVID vaccine because I haven't seen the new CD. I know that they've been approved, but I haven't seen anything about the new guidelines for whom that next COVID booster is recommended. My friend Nicole Dwyer. Hi, Nicole. 0% morphology. Can we get several good embryos with IVF? The answer is yes. Morphology means somebody's job is to sit and look under a microscope at sperm. They're a spermologist. right? And so they look under the microscope at sperm all day long. And what they're able to do is to determine, well, what percentage of the sperm actually looks normal versus not normal. In sperm, they have a head, they have a neck, they have a tail. Sometimes they have two tails. Sometimes they have a tapered neck. Sometimes they have a great big head. So, there's lots of different things that can make a sperm look unusual. It is normal that 96% of our sperm are abnormal. So it is normal to have a normal morphology of only 4%. It's a very subjective thing. So they say that it's hard to reproduce those values from one technologist to the next under the microscope. Now we see that that most of our folks in our andrology lab are pretty consistent with what they find. But just because they're not seeing normal sperm doesn't mean they're looking at all 50 million of those sperm. So presumably, yes, there are going to be some normal sperm someplace in there. And even still, just because they look abnormal doesn't mean that they necessarily function abnormal. Abnormal morphology has a term. It's called teratospermia. Teratospermia means abnormal sperm morphology. And it is associated with people who have a hard time getting pregnant, maybe because we're seeing them and looking at their sperm under the microscope, but it is not considered to be a cause of infertility. There are several different methods that we can use in the laboratory to help select the better sperm. One of those is called Zymot, Z-Y-M-O-T. It is an add-on that you can use when you're doing IVF to help select the better sperm. It costs, I believe it's about $200. So does it help? I think it probably does to some degree. Is it necessary that everybody uses that $200 add-on? No, I don't think so. But it's $200. It's not $2,000. So it might be worth. You have to have adequate sperm count for Zymot to work, and you have to have enough motility, meaning to say that the sperm are swimming, because what they do is they swim their way through. The better ones swim their way up through the little device, the little cartridge that results, in theory, of better sperm coming out on the other end. And it's from those sperm that you select the sperm that you're going to use for your IVF. Pretty Binky says, I had an ectopic pregnancy last year. I'm going through, or last year, I am going through with IVF next year. Will I be watched carefully after IVF? The answer to that is absolutely. There is no reason an ectopic pregnancy should ever be missed in an IVF practice, in a fertility practice, because we are very well aware of the risk of ectopic, or say, for instance, tubal pregnancy in folks who have a difficult time getting pregnant. So we do watch that very carefully. Now, when you do IVF, the risk of an ectopic pregnancy is actually very low. So having had one ectopic, a tubal pregnancy, can increase your risk for having another tubal pregnancy with a spontaneous conception by sometimes up to 40% after one ectopic. And after two ectopics, it can be as high as 80% risk for an ectopic. So with IVF, the risk, we're not using the fallopian tubes, but the risk of an ectopic is, probably about 1 to 2%. Yes, we do watch that very carefully to make sure that it is an intrauterine pregnancy that you have there, Pretty Binky. So hopefully that helps out. B Voyager is wondering, will endometriomas be a hindrance when trying to get pregnant via IVF? Well, they can sometimes get in the way, but usually what we're able to do when going to retrieve eggs is that we're able to skirt around the side of endometriosis collections in the ovary so that we can get to the eggs. Now, if an endometrioma is too large, let's say you have a very, very large endometriosis collection in the ovary, and again, that's called an endometrioma, then we have to worry about its size impacting where the rest of the eggs can grow. But it's a little bit of a catch-22, because if you have surgery to remove that endometrioma, it can lower your AMH, your ovarian reserve and can have an effect on egg quality as well. So you really have to juggle that. Seek the counsel of an expert if you're thinking about having the surgery. Say, by the way, it's a quarter till the top of the hour, 45 minutes past. This is Fertility with Fink and Friends. I am Fink. You are Friends. Dr. Randy Fink live from Colorado Springs, where CNY Fertility sits and waits for you day in and day out. What else we got going on here, my friends? Nice to see everyone as always on this Tuesday afternoon. Hello to IVF therapist. Oh, and Fluffy Tail 33. I like that. Mrs. Marilyn Mom Rowe said, I attempted IVF 4 times in Mexico. 3 of those times my eggs didn't react to meds. I'm hopeful that the US has stronger meds and I have more options. Well, you know, I've known a lot of people who have gone out of the country for IVF. I think in South America, the protocols are fairly legitimate. I have seen some questionable things that arise from folks who have gone to Mexico and into the Caribbean. So not to speak ill of any other practice, because I'm sure that they work just as hard and care just as much. But I too would hope, Miss Marilyn, that we can do a better job for you here at CNY. Let's see what we got here. KM Porter, would you recommend metformin for an AMH of 6.52 for a 29-year-old female with irregular cycles but no other symptoms of PCOS? How long is it recommended prior to stims? The answer is yes. So metformin is something that we use for, it's a medication that's used for folks with diabetes. It is something in PCOS we use to help you return to normal ovulation. And so if you're not having regular periods there, Ms. Porter, it is, by definition, probably their PCOS, with your AMH being 6.5. So yes, I would. That may get you to ovulate normally. In the IVF world, we use metformin because it also helps with egg quality. And in the case of someone who's 29 with an AMH of 6.5, I would expect you are going to make a lot of eggs, but quantity is not quality. So that's one of the reasons that I would say, yes, metformin is probably a good thing for you before starting your stimulations. In general, a month before stim should be fine. The longer you're on it, I think the better off you may be. It may increase your spontaneous fertility rate over time, but certainly a month leading up to your stim probably makes the most sense. Let's see what we got here. Caroline over on the Facebook side. Can we predict the quality and genetic normalcy of the embryos based on the egg quality in the oocyte report from embryology after retrieval? The answer is unfortunately no. There's no way, we can look at an egg and say, oh, this is a pretty good egg, or this is a fair quality egg, or this is a poor quality egg. Does that mean anything? Well, it's by the same token grading an embryo. Can we tell about genetic normalcy by an embryo's grade? And the answer to that is no. No, we can't. So you can have a beautifully highly graded embryo that has multiple chromosome abnormalities, or a poorly graded embryo that is the only normal one in the bunch. They seem to be different things. So no, you really can't tell. And even an egg that appears to be of poor quality can still give you a completely normal baby. So please don't get hung up on that. Just like I ask people, please don't be hung up on embryo grading because perfect babies come from embryos of every size, shape, and color. Tara Ann is back asking for a tried with donor eggs and was told the day of transfer the embryo didn't make it. It's been a long journey. I want to try with my eggs, but the doctor tells me the oocyte count was low along with the AMH levels. So one of the things that some people with a lower AMH will opt to do, a lower ovarian reserve, is opt to do a stimulation with their own eggs, but to do what's called a donor egg add-on. So, in addition to doing your own IVF cycle, you purchase a cohort of donor eggs, which are fertilized at the same time that your own eggs that come from you are going to be fertilized. And it ends up saving you a little money than if instead of if you were doing that separately. So, that's called a donor egg add on. To your own cycle. So, Tara, that might be an option for you there. Um, let's see. We are using this comes from again from Ethan. We're using donor sperm on your website from Reproductive Resources. If it's on the website, then yes. So there are a list of approved a list of approved sperm banks on the CNY website, and the reason for that is because um, um, our offices in New York are in New York, and New York has has even stricter criteria than the federal government for donor genetic material like sperm or eggs. So they have to meet these sperm banks have to meet the New York State criteria, and that's what's listed on the website. So yes, indeed. This comes from Mill. Hi, Mill. 41 years old. AMH tested at 1.9 and 2.8, 29 follicles found on day 3 of the period. So that would be an antral follicle count. The partner's semen analysis was good, possible endometriosis. Would you recommend regular or mini IVF? Well, I would recommend regular. In my opinion, regular, an age appropriate dose of IVF, I think would probably make the most sense. If you did a mini dose of IVF, I mean, you've got a very good AMH there. That's good. So I expect, and having 29 antral follicles tells me that, well, you have a good egg reserve there. The goal here with IVF is to maximize the number of eggs in order to maximize the number of embryos, in order to maximize the options. So the difference between mini IVF and regular IVF for you would really probably only be a very a small difference. But in my opinion, I would go with the regular IVF cycle. We do know that doing back-to-back cycles, which means doing one retrieval and then getting a period and starting on the next stimulation, does help your outcomes. And so I think that would be a valuable thing to do. I might do a regular IVF cycle the first time around and then mini IVF in the second cycle, because the medication that you used in the first is going to continue to be helping you along with the second. So just the thought. Nice to meet you, Mill. Tamisha is here, and nice to see you, Tamisha. Is it normal not to see follicles at baseline, even though my AMH is 5.48? You don't always. And that's why at CNY we really don't use that antral follicle count as a reliable marker. With an AMH of 5.48, I would expect that you are probably going to respond pretty well. Okay, Honey Girl 931 chiming in from San Jose. Good afternoon, San Jose. Consultation at the end of the month, and we will look forward to seeing you in the fall. Thanks so much for being here. Erica is here with us too, Erica Walden. Hi, I'm on the mini IVF cycle on stim day 5, had only 2 follicles in my left ovary, greater than 12, and a suspected endometrioma on my right, with no large follicles. My initial AFC was 16. Would you recommend my next cycle be standard or go ahead with a laparoscopy? Well, that's a good question. I certainly think a laparoscopy probably makes sense before you do an embryo transfer. But if you do a laparoscopy now and go to try to do some work with that endometrioma, you are likely to decrease your AMH even more. So you're only stim day 5. Ideal stim is a minimum of 9 days. So you may see that you have several eggs that continue to grow. I would want to look at that and say, because also I'm not sure how old you are and not sure what your AMH is. A lot of times at CNY, we will reach for that mini stim dose, Why do we do that? Well, because the evidence shows that when you use very high doses of medication, sometimes the ovaries just don't respond at all. They don't know what they're supposed to be doing. So they may just kind of shut themselves down. When you use low dose or mini dose, you often get the same response as you got if you were using a high dose, but with a much lower exposure to medication and a much lower cost. We would rather see you save money on the medications, knowing that you are able to do multiple cycles of IVF to continue to build up and bank your embryos. But I would wonder whether that mini dose is the right choice for you, or maybe increasing the dose a little bit might be the better answer, aside from going to do a laparoscopy. Certainly, if you're still planning to do some egg retrievals. All right, what else we got here? We got about 5 minutes left here. What's your take on Omnitrope? Does it help in women who are over 40? Omnitrope is human growth hormone. And the answer is yes, I do believe it helps with egg quality. Growth hormone is what keeps us young. People in the anti-aging community use it for fat loss and muscle gain and sex drive and hair and skin and nails. And you can see the difference in somebody who's using a growth hormone. You may not see the difference so much in looking at someone who's using it short term for egg quality purposes, but I guarantee you your eggs see it. So maybe the growth hormone has the ability to help our own DNA repair mechanisms at the level of the ovaries, help us to make better eggs. So it is one of the things that we reach for when we're trying to help folks get better eggs. Omnitrope is what that's called. It's a daily injection. Unfortunately, it's a little pricey, but I do recommend it if you're able. Let's see what we got here. We're going to run out of time, so I want to try to get to some questions. Oh, my dear friend in Miami, Lowly Ash. Hello, my friend. Definitely affordable, and Dr. Fink is the most empathetic doctor I've ever met. Did you say that Dr. Fink is the most pathetic doctor you've ever met? Because that's what I heard you say. All right, moving right along here. How long does it take for an ovarian cyst to dissolve? What if you don't have a regular cycle? Cysts in the ovaries are usually caused by, so if you're doing it in the beginning of your cycle and you have done your baselines and it shows that you have a cyst, and let's say you have an elevated estrogen level, which I think may be your situation there. What it says is that it's probably that it may be a leftover cyst, a leftover follicle from the cycle before. So if that's the case, sometimes you can give it 10 days and it'll go away. Certainly by the next cycle, you would expect that to be gone. Sometimes we'll put people on birth control in that scenario because the birth control will just kind of keep the ovary quiet, keep it from doing anything else, and let that cyst resolve on its own. So there you go, my friend Andre. And hi to Angie, who also joined us here, who had a positive pregnancy test, which is just a wonderful thing. Do I understand, and this comes back from Facebook, did I understand back from Mill that if I have endometriosis, it's better to do egg retrievals first and then to have a laparoscopy done before the transfer? Yes, I would say that is correct. Endometriosis can affect your AMH level, but certainly having surgery, if you have to do anything with the endometriosis in the ovary, that's definitely going to have a negative effect on the AMH level. Furthermore, endometriosis may not have much of an effect on you at all. The sooner we get the eggs from you, the better off we are. So that's why I always recommend do the IVF first, get your eggs, make your embryos, and then think about doing what you have to do to clean matters up before you do an embryo transfer. I see a new name here, Leslie Lambden on the Facebook side with a very short time to go here. Do you see higher success rates with fresh or frozen embryos? Generally speaking, across the board, a frozen embryo is going to have a higher success rate than a fresh embryo because your body has been in egg-making mode when you're doing a fresh transfer. Now, that said, there are many situations that people get pregnant from fresh transfers every day, but always our success rates are going to be higher with a frozen transfer than with a fresh. There are some situations that we will tell you don't do a fresh. It's not going to work because we can see from the hormone numbers. There are some situations where we do it and we find, oh gosh, you know what? You're going to get really sick if you get pregnant. So we want you not to. But in general, they should be close to even, but it's always going to be a little bit higher with a frozen transfer. I think all this social media is about to kick me off here. So gosh, let me say it is so nice to see everybody as always on a Tuesday evening. Join me next week, would you please? 4 o'clock in the Mountain Time, 6 o'clock on the East Coast, and 3 in the West for Fertility with Fink and Friends. Until then, remember what I always say, if this is about fertility for you, it is not your novel. It ain't your book. It's just a chapter in that book. And what we're here to do is to rewrite that chapter together. So until next week, thanks so much for being here. God bless everyone, and good night.